Welcome to The Cut Comparison, where we compare and contrast different versions of our favorite horror movies. I'm James A. Janice, and today we'll be looking at Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from 2009, which has a theatrical version and a director's cut. As I've mentioned a whole bunch before, including in this movie's kill count, if you didn't see it in theaters when it first came out, then you've probably only seen the director's cut, since that's the version Rob Zombie put on most home video releases. But luckily, my awesome neighbors to the north released this Blu-ray of the theatrical versions, and that's what I used for the kill count episodes to keep things consistent, by which I mean using the theatrical versions for the kill counts and comparing the alternate versions on this show. The differences in the director's cut of Halloween 2 are a bit more substantial than those of the previous film's alternate cut. It makes significant changes to the film's ending and its character arcs. Most notably, Laurie Strode is in an entirely different emotional place in the director's cut. While the theatrical version sees her as a mostly recovered victim who slowly begins to backslide into psychosis, the director's cut has her dealing with PTSD right from the get-go. It might make her a little less likable, but it's also way more realistic and interesting. Without further ado, let's get to the cuts. The first change in the director's cut is a scene that helps establish those coroner van drivers as kinda jackasses when they ask Sheriff Brackett about the bodies inside.
How many? 2. Heavy?
It doesn't matter, Hooks, do your job. This comes after a few extra shots of Laurie on a stretcher in the hospital being taken care of by Dr. Maple, Caroline Williams' character. Then, aside from a single extra line of dialogue in the ambulance ride, the rest of the movie proceeds the same until it comes to Laurie's hospital chase scene with Michael Myers. The director's cut features a segment that maybe gives the viewers a slight hint that this is just a dream sequence, since Laurie winds up in a giant bucket full of cadavers that she has to crawl her way out of before continuing to flee from her brother. I don't know for sure, but I feel like open dumpsters of dead bodies aren't a real thing at hospitals. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure you'll tell me if I am. This extended scene also ends up giving us a bit of a sight gag, since it shows Laurie unsuccessfully trying to get a fire axe out of a glass case so she can use it. After giving up and running away, we're back to theatrical version footage, which shows how Michael effortlessly gets the axe. Juxtaposed against Laurie's unsuccessful efforts, it kind of works as a little joke. The next change comes after Laurie wakes up from her nightmare, and it's one that situates the movie in an entirely different time. The theatrical version takes place just 1 year after the previous movie's events, whereas the director's cut takes place 2 years later. I'm not entirely sure why that change was made, but I feel like 2 years is a little more interesting. I don't know. After that, we get our first divergence in the emotional health of Laurie Strode, and I actually think it's hilarious how it happens. Consider this scene in the theatrical version when Annie tries to help Laurie by telling her to take things one day at a time.
One day at a time, babe. One day at a time.
Pretty nice, right? The director's cut lets that scene go on just a smidge longer though, and shows us how Laurie really feels.
One day at a time, babe.
One day at a time. One fucking day at a time. You know what, if I hear that fucking phrase one more fucking time...
In this version, Laurie ain't having it, and Annie gets annoyed at Laurie's recalcitrance towards her therapist.
It's her job, Laurie. My God, what am I supposed to say?
We also find out in this version that Sheriff Brackett is a straight up monster.
Oh, nice. Thanks for leaving me some coffee, Dad.
And you call yourself a man of the law? It's sad to see these two friends at each other's throats like this when they should be a mutual support system. But it also makes sense, since in this version, we see Laurie tell her therapist Barbara that Annie is a living reminder of the tragedy she went through. This is different than the theatrical version conversation, where instead, Laurie tearfully talks about how much she misses her parents. The DC also has an extra line confirming what happened at the end of Halloween 1.
I know Michael Myers is dead. I shot him in the fucking head.
As well as an extension to the scene where Laurie looks at a Rorschach on the wall and injects a little bit more of that dream theme into this movie.
So what do you see?
White horse. So what does that tell you?
It tells me Rob Zombie really wanted to force that motif. Another running thread to the changes in Zombie's director's cut is that Loomis is somehow even more of an asshole than he was in the theatrical version. This includes some extra lines to his publicist Nancy that further justify her asking him not to get personal. It still makes sense when she says it in the theatrical version.
You are quite an odd one, aren't you? Hello.
Can we just not get personal?
Look at this.
But as you can see here, it's a lot more pointed with the addition of these director's cut lines.
You are quite an odd one, aren't you? I mean, look at you. Are you color coordinated? What pink clogs and this orange thing? What are you, a clam digger or something? And I don't mean that in the lesbian sense.
No, I think you're being carpet muncher.
I'm
First
not
of all,
judging.
No, I'm not.
Hello.
Can we just not get personal?
Look at this.
His presentation at the lectern also betrays a much more pitiful man, since he makes a few long-winded jokes that don't land with the audience at all. It's way more pathetic than in the theatrical version, which jumps straight away to a question about being responsible for Michael's murders that really sets him off. He also has some extra dialogue in the scene outside the Myers house. Both versions include that awful line about beating Nancy, but he goes even further in the director's cut.
Here, now take that and go sit in the car. Go on, get your ass in there.
I'm not positive, but I feel like that last bit is a reference to Loomis's line in the original Halloween.
Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
Who knows though? Back at the Brackett home, after an extra line of the sheriff's incredulity about his daughter not knowing Lee Marvin, there's more Annie-Laurie strife after Laurie runs away to puke.
I'll go. I'll always go.
Yeah, Sheriff, I do not envy your living situation. The subsequent bathroom conversation is slightly different, but nothing too substantial. And then the next day, Laurie gets an extra scene with her therapist that shows her falling apart. In it, Laurie frantically recounts her dream to Barbara, while also talking about, like, a Frankenstein's monster and a baby pig that she saw in the town square. What? And this crazy editing is in the movie. That's not me doing this, man. It's enough to drive you to binge drink.
Meet my new best friend.
Yep, Laurie and her new best friend get in an argument with her old best friend in another extra scene between them that features lots of shouting. In the director's cut, these two ladies are just completely done with each other at this point.
You know what? You act like you're the only one whose life got fucking trashed. Get the fuck out of my room!
I'm not impressed.
All of that turmoil is missing from the theatrical version, where instead, Laurie wakes up from her nightmare and talks to a stuffed bear for a little bit.
Buddy, I'm going crazy. Don't worry. That fucking cocksucker Michael Myers is dead. He won't get you. You always know what to say, buddy.
Man, she's like two entirely different characters between the two versions. The strip club scene has a few extra lines of dialogue, and Big Phil yelling a little louder at Howard to take out the trash, but the most important addition to this segment is the extra dreamlike scene of Michael's mom talking to the two Michaels about how it's their job to bring the family back together. Man, I hate the ghost mom shit in this movie. I definitely did not need any more of it. After a title card announcing the big day, the theatrical version gives us that baby pig scene that got chopped up for Laurie's frantic spiel in the DC. It's actually pretty funny that in the theatrical version, it's just a peaceful, albeit pretty pointless, moment for the character before she ends up discovering Loomis's book. After she does that, the director's cut has this weird segment where Michael and his ghost entourage come across a billboard advertising The Devil Walks Among Us. Not only is the editing weird, it sometimes looks like the three of them are staring at the line outside the bookstore instead of at a billboard in a field, but man, I hate the shot of Michael looking at his ghost mom with really wide eyes. It's such a weird look for Michael Myers to have. I hate it almost as much as him playing with his chains at the end of part 5. Almost. The Barnyard Bash that Laurie and her friends go to is edited differently in the two cuts, with 1,000 tiny changes that don't really amount to anything, so I don't feel the need to comment on them here. Harley gets a few more lines with the Wolfman though, both as they walk to a shaggin' wagon.
A blowjob? Is that what you guys call them still?
What,
I call him sucking a dick.
And also once they're inside, where she has to all but beg him to touch her. The director's cut has a few more characters being dicks moments, including Annie as she teases the deputy sent to protect her.
The fuck are you gonna do, jackhole?
You'll find out.
Oh, I'll find out? Oh, I'm shaking in my boots.
And the jackass hosting the barnyard party as he makes a couple of extra sexist jokes. I just love how for both of his Halloween director's cuts, Rob Zombie decided that his unlikable characters just weren't unlikable enough. After Laurie and Maya get home from the party, there's an extra scene where they eat some cookies and discuss what kind of tea they want to brew. Totally necessary, Rob. Thanks for adding that back in, man. I don't know how the theatrical version survived without it. I will say, however, that the next director's cut change is probably my favorite, and it's to the scene where Sheriff Brackett finds his daughter dead on the bathroom floor. The theatrical version is sad, but that's mostly conveyed by the music on the soundtrack, as Brad Dourif's dialogue is muted out entirely. In the director's cut, we actually get to hear his anguish, and I friggin' love his performance.
Oh no, Annie! Hey, God, no! God, please! Oh, God! No! No!
I've heard from some fans that they think his acting is bad here, but I strongly disagree. This dude seems torn up in a way where he can't even function properly. I also like the addition of this footage with young Annie Brackett, aka Jamie Lloyd aged Danielle Harris, to represent sentimental memories that the sheriff thinks back to as his life crumbles to pieces. And that leaves us with our finale, which, like I mentioned in the intro, is an entirely different beast between the two cuts. They diverge inside the shack after Loomis yells "stop it" a bunch of times in his very Atkinsian way.
Stop!
It is time, Michael.
Stop!
Then, if you'll recall, the theatrical cut sees Michael attacking Loomis and giving him a beatdown that includes a whole bunch of squishy-sounding knife stabs that kill the doctor so bad it leaves his freaking brain exposed. Then Brackett, seeing a shot open up, takes it, and his hit sends Michael stumbling back into some farm equipment upon which he is impaled. Laurie goes up to him and is all like, "Hug me, brother!" And when he lifts a defiant knife up instead, she uses it to stab him to death. She walks out, a wild and untamed thing wearing the Michael mask, and when she takes it off in slow motion, we transition into those final few shots in a whitewashed sanitarium. Great. In the director's cut, everything plays out differently, because after all the yelling inside the shack, things take a more silent turn.
Stop!
It is time, Michael.
Stop!
Take us home.
Stop! Stop!
Yeah, it's a pretty cool stylistic decision, as we see a bunch of long shots of the shack without hearing any of the noise that was just going on inside, until all of a sudden, Michael and Loomis bust through the wall of the building and wind up outside. Then, Michael talks, and what does Michael have to say for himself? Well, at least you can never say Michael's actions don't match his rhetoric, because after one stab to the gut, Loomis is down. With the shot clear, the police force opens up on Michael in a firing squad somewhat reminiscent of the one that ended the cold open in Jason Goes to Hell. It's also a little like the ending of The Devil's Rejects, Hold the Skinner. But in any case, it kills Michael. This is his death in the director's cut, at the hands of a bunch of cops instead of Laurie Strode. As for Laurie, she follows her dead ghost mom out of the shack and into the spotlight. As Brackett watches, Laurie picks up Michael's murder knife, but in this cut, she takes that knife over to Dr. Loomis, who, like, I thought he was already dead here. But as she stands there, some trigger-happy cops open up on her, and she falls back from the gunshots in a couple of slow-motion still frames. A pretty nice cover of Love Hurts starts playing, calling back to that scene in Rob Zombie's original, as we get an excellent overhead view of the three principal characters of this series dead on the ground. I friggin' love this shot, it's great. And yes, I do think Laurie dies here in this cut, even though the shot eventually fades to that same sanitarium ending as the theatrical version. I just chalk it up to being some kind of near-death hallucination on Laurie's way out of this physical realm. So after that side-by-side, how do the differences between these cuts break down? Let's have Green Screen James tell us. Yeah! Thanks, Practical Set James. As far as runtime goes, the director's cut is more than 13 minutes longer than the theatrical version. It just adds that many scenes of Laurie being a mess, I guess. For kills, the director's cut scores one extra, since it has Laurie dying at the end, which I think works nicely for some closure to the Rob Zombie duology. However, just like in the last movie, there's no difference in the gore or violence between the cuts. The big difference is how Laurie Strode is managing. The theatrical version sees a healthier survivor, while the director's cut shows us a post-trauma victim in shambles. The DC also has an even more douchey Dr. Loomis running around. And finally, the director's cut ending is entirely different, and it's sort of a mixed bag for me. I like Laurie dying and the shot of the three main characters' bodies all together, but I don't like Michael saying die, and I prefer the way he and Loomis are killed in the theatrical version. My final verdict is that the character issues in the director's cut make it more interesting and unique, and since Laurie's death wraps the whole thing up in a nice little bow, I'll give it the edge over the theatrical version. Although, honestly, I'm not a huge fan of either. And with this video, I'm officially done with the Halloween series on Dead Meat for a while, at least until the new movie comes out on Blu-ray. At that point, I'll kill count it up and do a ranking of all 11 films in the series. But until then, I'm James A. Janice, and you can consider these cuts compared. Hey everyone, thanks a lot for watching this cut comparison. I want to keep thanking patrons who have been with me for over a year. People like Alyssa Smith, Christina Hirko, David Rittenhouse, Nina, just Nina, Yvonne Hernandez maybe, Lassie Meyer, Braden Higgins. All of you are so awesome. Thank you so much for being there for over a year. I already did a little knife dance in the kill count, so I guess I can't do it again. Just kidding, I can dance however much I want. Be good people.